Good morning and welcome to our Columbus Chamber of Commerce Experience Series. I'm Don DePiro, your president and CEO of the Columbus Chamber of Commerce. We'd like to thank all of you for joining us this morning for this wonderful event as we hear more about workforce and hiring, which is all on the top of our lists these days. We'd really like to thank GBQ for sponsoring this series and, of course, our esteemed board chair, the managing director of GBQ, Darcy Congrove. Darcy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Don, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you here as the Columbus Chamber Board Chair and a representative of GBQ, the presenting sponsor of the Experience Series. GBQ is a public accounting firm based here in Columbus, and we represent clients across a variety of industries, ranging from construction and manufacturing to real estate and high tech. Each of those industries and individual businesses experienced a differential impact from the pandemic over the last year, but we know that they all have one key thing in common: the need to attract and retain talent. Employee engagement is a key piece of that attraction and retention strategy. So today, we're going to take a deep dive into the power of harnessing a growth mindset and enhancing a culture of workplace collaboration, a topic more relevant now than ever as we advance into 2021. We'll hear directly from a panel of experts representing important stakeholders in our Central Ohio community as they share valuable workforce trends and insight. I'd now like to introduce Kelly Fuller, the Chamber's Workforce Director, to start the program.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kelly Fuller, Director of Workforce for the Columbus Chamber of Commerce, and welcome to our Q2 Experience Series event. As has been mentioned by both Don and Darcy, we're working hard to make sure that we're bringing to our members topical information that is, in the forefront of their concerns. Developing a growth mindset, emotional intelligence, and how that impacts our corporate culture is something we've been discussing all year. We've experienced a year of incredible change and very quick adapting to our ever-changing experience through COVID and so much of what we've experienced the last 15 months. So today we're going to talk about how do we really take a look at our own emotional intelligence, that of our teams, how we can foster that, what really is a growth mindset, and how can we put all of that to work for us as we continue to grow our businesses and to enhance our corporate culture. I have three panelists joining us today. One panelist we're going to maybe bring in via phone. We're having a little bit of difficulty with connecting, but I'll ask Eric and Erica to go ahead and join us, and Beth if she's available. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, guys. Beth, are you there? We'll wait. We'll get her in as soon as we're able. First, I'd like to introduce Erica Banta with Ohio State University and Eric Pennington with Spirit of EQ. Erica, I'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at Ohio State?
I can. Thanks, Kelly. Good to be here with you this morning. I'm the Director of Talent Management with the Office of Human Resources at OSU, serving our staff and faculty.
Very good. And Eric?
Yes, I'm the managing partner of Spirit of EQ. We're an emotional intelligence, data, and people development firm based here in Columbus, Ohio. Glad to be here.
Yeah, great to have you both. So, Eric, Spirit of EQ, talk to us, what is EQ? What is emotional intelligence? What do we need to know about this?
Well, how much time do you have, Kelly? Well, ultimately, EQ is just short for emotional intelligence. And ultimately, the simplest and maybe the most straightforward definition of it is it's the management of our thoughts and our emotions to make optimal decisions.
Very good. And is there science behind this? I mean, how does, how do we make decisions? What's going on there in our brains and our bodies?
Sure, there is science behind it, and I'd like to maybe look at it through the lens of, every day, each person, whether they're on this webinar or, traveling on the road, whatever, we all have the intention of making good decisions, right? Whether that's leaving, our homes at the right time to get to a certain place, whether it be work or personal, whether it's finishing a project, collaborating with a team member, those kind of things. The funny thing is, though, is that emotions are the things that drive people. And I know that many of you out there might say, well, duh, Eric, yes, I know. And I have a few people that I could tell you about. The reality of it is that emotions are chemicals in our brains, and they're put there they're our ally. And maybe later as we go through the program, we can talk about some of the mischaracterizations, but ultimately those emotions are designed to communicate with us. You think of it as a neurobiological nudge. So there's a message for Eric to Eric when certain things happen. And that's a very good thing. The challenge comes is how do we manage that? Because some people, when they get angry, they scream, they shout, they react. Some people, when they get angry, are very thoughtful. They want to give themselves time to cool down before they answer. And it can be anywhere in between as well. So the reality of emotional intelligence, it's a learnable skill that helps us manage those emotions so that our decision making is much more optimal and we're getting better results.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. That's a very helpful description of that. And as we do go forward, and we're talking about this through the lens of businesses, right? Sometimes, I remember, in my first job, kind of being told, you leave those emotional stuff, out in the car or at home. You don't bring it into the office. But this year, Erica, with everything that we've seen with the blending of, where does work and home kind of begin and end with working remotely? How has that impacted the workforce?
I think that we definitely have, we'll talk about growth mindset. It's taking something that is perceived as a negative and turning it into an opportunity. And I think that we've afforded the opportunity for our businesses and organizations to tailor themselves to the human, to adapt to the human, rather than perhaps a fixed mindset where our workforce is in our business. And it's a different way of building the relationship between the organization and its employees. And I think that we've seen over the last year that there have been some intentional connections between people that might not have happened if we were just passing in the hallway in the office. That we were experiencing something that we'd not experienced before together. And it was sort of this great equalizer. And I think businesses are really, the best business continuity plan in the world was challenged last year. And I think that businesses and organizations are starting to adapt and embrace from just a business perspective that growth mindset in the organization and perhaps start to foster that culture.
Right. A couple things around that. Are you guys getting a lot of feedback? No, okay, just me, sorry. I'm glad you're not. So a couple of things around that, Erica, I'd like to respond to. I think this year, from a business perspective, I think business leaders really were kind of coming face to face with so many of the challenges and barriers that their workforce have been experiencing, and helping to try to address some of those. And through everything that we've just experienced, one of the things I just read recently about growth mindset in the world of work, that leaders who are open to upward feedback, that are open to looking at failures or setbacks as a way to grow and learn, those seem to be some of the hallmarks of how we can look at a growth mindset in the workforce.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And as I coach and talk to leaders around the university, I talk about when you're setting up, so I'll talk a little shop talk for a moment.
Yeah.
When you're setting up performance management plans, and when you're looking at some of those traditional HR functionalities that are around setting goals, we need to, if we're going to embrace a growth mindset and create that culture, we have to flip the script on those traditional goal setting activities and that traditional performance management, where we embrace not how many widgets you made, but how did the people feel around you when you made them? How are you doing your work versus what is the product, and how fast did you do it, and how many did you make? And that really embraces that core of what it is that you're talking about, is fostering that growth mindset around some of those performance management practices. And it's not easy to do, because that's not something that we've traditionally learned in business. We measure your effectiveness and the things that you've done and produced, not your emotional intelligence when doing your work. So it's going to be that's a huge cultural shift, and I think that people's appetites for embracing that culture is stronger now more than ever.
Yeah, I agree. What are your thoughts on that, Eric, as far as like thinking about like emotional intelligence and how the recognition of our emotions and how that plays into developing strong growth mindsets in the workplace?
Well, certainly, I think it's a key component in as much as that, as example in our work, we have tools that actually measure the emotional intelligence of the individual. So that gives them a good sort of starting point to understand where they're at. And then as you go forward and they continue to develop, be it a learning plan or something of that sort, they can begin to get into that level of mastery, so that when they're in, whether it's the volatile situations with maybe a team member, maybe it's a difficult decision that has to be made from a workforce perspective, and whether or not there is a layoff or something of that nature, they position themselves to make better decisions again, and that's going to determine the outcomes. And I think most business leaders, that's the key thing that they chase, typically day in and day out. This way is a much healthier way to get there versus just looking at it from, as Erica mentioned, just an effectiveness thing. Did you get it done or didn't you get it done? Because again, those emotions are what drive us, and learning how to manage them is key.
Yeah. Talk a little bit more about the assessments and the tools that you use, Eric, and how that can be have an impact for a business leader and an organization.
Sure. Our tools are typically designed from the perspective, again, as measurement and getting a snapshot of where that individual, and by extension, the group, maybe dynamic, a team. Once that's been measured, and we have a very highly valid, reliable tool. There's been a number of these assessments done across the globe, and that's important, not from the standpoint of depth, width, and all of that. It's important because we know we're working with good data, right? And good data leads us to those better outcomes. Typically, and I want to stress this, Kelly, and I know, Erica, you know this as well, it's not a one-time experience where we give them information, almost that, oh, I'm very empathetic. Great, thanks for letting me know. I'll see you next year type thing. Because as we all know, human behavior, and we've all developed these different neural pathways that have been there for years, change is very difficult. So we believe in a model that is a come alongside of and grow that, so that we have a change in outcome and as the behavior goes. So from that perspective, the tool is the starting point for us to understand from a data perspective, what do we have? Where's the person at? And then carve out a pathway for growth.
Very good. I do want to mention, and I think maybe you've touched on this just a little bit with that response, Eric, but we do have a question from Jason Melton, who's joining us today. Soft skill areas like EQ, growth mindset, adaptability appear to be very subjective. And if an immediate manager or leader lacks the right level of these areas, it can impact how an individual employee is skilled and coached. Have you seen any models to quantify those areas of ways to control subjectivity and bias?
Sure, that's a great question, and I would tell you there is some data out there about that, but I would like to go to that route of, for example, with us, we start with leadership first, so that they grow their emotional intelligence and they grow their ability to understand it. We've even had clients who, as we've gotten into engagement, will say, well, I think my people over in this particular work group could really use this. And we'll always say to them, well, our process is we need to start with those who are leading the engagement or leading the organization. Because if it's absent at that level and present at another level, you're going to butt heads. And it will be, to what Jason just asked, it's going to be this subjective thing. So from that perspective, from a real world approach, we want to start there and begin to cascade from that point. However, as I mentioned, there is data that can give you more quantifiable. But again, if you don't get it at the leadership level, it's very difficult to see it throughout.
Yeah. Erica, I want to pick up on that a little bit with thinking about emotional intelligence and growth mindset from a leadership perspective. How does that, either the lack of the development of that or, embracing growth mindset and emotional intelligence as important, how can that impact your workforce and your corporate culture?
Oh, it's a huge impact. And for those of you in the audience here that love data and like me, this is a tricky thing, because it's hard to measure the things that we're talking about.
Yeah.
And from a business perspective and a workforce perspective, the greatest factor of measurement comes with time. And when we look at some HR related data measures like employee retention and employee engagement scores and things like that, or we do 360s with leaders on executive coaching instances, some of those are the things that can tell an organization if inculcating this growth mindset is working in the workplace, and it's changing the face of the work. And so from the HR lens, those are some of the ways that it can impact your workforce. Attrition goes down, people are more satisfied, more engaged, relationships are stronger, and we all know that all of those things lead to a better product for our customers.
So when we have individuals who are new to the organization, new hires, how do we, communicate our emotional intelligence or our desire to build a culture with growth mindset? Like, how are we like relaying that information and sharing that? I'd open that up to both of you, I guess.
Please, Erica.
Okay. I think long gone are the days of the standard orientation for a new employee, where you sit in the proverbial room, whether it's on here or and you get some paperwork, and here's where you'll go, here's where the lunchroom is. I'm seeing these more dynamic orientations start for new employees across industry, and I will say that OSU is no different. We are building into that first day experience things that invoke emotion. We talk about our values as an organization. We're very intentional about talking at length about our cultural value of diversity and equity and inclusion. And these are topics that not only inspire and get people excited that they've chosen their new employer, but it also level sets that foundation of this is important to us, and we're going to talk about it right out of the gate.
Yeah.
There's something that you said there too, Erica, that I think is really, really great in the sense of that the idea that it's intentional is very, very important for these things to be intentional in nature. And I think in many respects, I know from what we've seen with our clients, is that when that is matched up with those actual tangible actions, or a la an assessment, a la a group session, a cohort, those type of things, there's that sense to those employees that it's not just the flavor of the month thing. It's not just, well, yeah, that's a great idea. We're going to look at that and maybe in the next quarter, because most of us have been there. We're watching very, as much as it's an orientation for us as the employee, it's really an orientation for the employer too, for them to get a sense, do they mean what they say? And that's a powerful point to remember.
Yeah, I agree. And I do want to pick up on something else that you said, Erica, that I think is, really worth talking more about is, as we, what does emotional intelligence and growth mindset mean around diversity, equity, and inclusion in the workplace? How important is, both of those, EQ and the growth mindset, to having an organization that really fosters a diverse and equitable workplace?
Yeah, I would say that there's so much of an intersect in the Venn diagram of everything that we're talking about, which is why I love having these conversations, because we can really look at the concept of empathy. And when I'm thinking of DE and I work, we want to not only embrace diversity of people and diversity of culture, but diversity of thought. And the inclusion piece, we can have diverse hires, but if they're hired in and there's not a sense of inclusion, then that isn't going to be a good employee experience. It's not going to be a good experience for the employer. And so there is a huge intersect in between EQ, growth mindset, and looking at diverse hiring practices.
Kelly, if I could add to Erica's point there, and I steal this from Walt Whitman, the idea that curiosity and not judgment. And I think that's really one of the big areas that we emphasize in our work, is that we need a lens of curiosity. And I think it flows over the DEI. It's that idea of, instead of me wanting to come to a quick conclusion about who you are, where you're from, what you've done, all of that stuff, is that idea of, well, I wonder, so tell me a little bit about, I want to understand. There's nothing wrong with judgment, except if you haven't exhausted curiosity, you're probably making it with faulty data. And I think that we get better at this idea of including and diversity and the equity piece when we are embracing that curiosity, that desire, and emotional intelligence. And Erica, you just mentioned empathy, a key competency, something that fuels that idea of, I want to understand. I'm curious about you. I'm curious about your group, whatever that may be. I think it leads to great outcomes.
I agree. Yeah. Erica, did you?
Yeah. And I'll just add to that we talk a lot about just the awareness of implicit bias, and that we all have it, all of us, every single one of us. And what are some of the strategies that an organization from a tactical perspective can employ to mitigate or interrupt that bias? Even just a little increases that D&I space. So, a great example would be reviewing resumes. Gosh, if you think about a traditional resume, there isn't a whole lot on there that couldn't invoke some type of bias. Whether it's what school you went to, how you spell your name, what part of town is your address. And so can we remove some of those things so that we are reviewing the skills, those key skills and abilities that someone wants to bring to your organization? And those have been some really powerful conversations with leaders around mitigating that bias that we all have.
Yeah.
And Erica, and I'm sorry, and Kelly, you can slap my hand for this, because what you just said, I think it's marvelous, because the reality within emotional intelligence is an idea of literacy around your emotions. So the person that's reviewing those resumes, Do they understand when those different emotions come to them? What do they mean? What are they telling me? Because if they can get a grasp and a management of that, they can begin to catch themselves from that implicit bias and make a better decision around, okay, wait a minute, just because the area code is X, where does that come from? Why does that make me uncomfortable? What is it about that, okay, is it because I'm this? Or that process leads to so much breakthrough for them in seeing people on that equal playing field. So, but thank you for that, Erica. That's great.
Yeah. No, and I'm glad, Erica, that you did describe it as well as this Venn diagram. We can't really talk about these things, independently. I mean, they all kind of go together to create these better workplaces and better corporate cultures. Unfortunately, Beth Thomas isn't able to join us in person today, but she did want to share a couple of points, and I'll ask the two of you if you can respond. She says that we have to work hard to create change resilient cultures. And those that are change agile and capable will be the ones who are successful. And this goes along with growth mindset from taking risk and embracing feedback and trying new things. What are your thoughts around Beth's statement there?
Eric?
A quick one would be amen. Because the change resilience piece, yeah, it's huge. And I don't think I have to tell anyone, this last year has proved that you can be in long-term environments where there is rapid change.
Yeah.
And quite frankly, I don't think that's over. And I think the more resilient we are and understanding about that, I think the better our results will be. I also think that it comes in looking at some of those neural pathways that we've developed and how do we navigate when change is either dropped at our door or whether it's a change we decide we want to make. Our brains are I say it this way before, our brains are our friend, right? They operate in a way to protect us, to give us order and direction. But when change comes, there's resistance, because that's not what we've done before. It's not how we've approached things, whether it's an individual or an organization. So being change resilient, I think that's very, very powerful. Thank you for that, Deb.
Yeah. And when I think about the individual in the workplace, and you had mentioned this earlier, Kelly, that that concept of home Erica and work Erica. But to Eric's point, I only have one happy brain, and it has to move sort of seamlessly in between those two things. And if anyone has worked from home this past year, that line has gotten extremely blurry. And so I like to think about when I think of resiliency, I date myself with sort of an old thing. I like to find ways to lift the needle off the record, because that record's always spinning. And I talk with groups about emotional and mental wellness. There are many programs at Ohio State, which is fantastic, that are embracing that, because of, this is sort of a buzzword right now, but it's really impactful, is that psychological safety in the workplace. Yeah. And if you don't feel that, you're not going to work very hard, and your organization's only going to get the minimum results. And you'll see some of those numbers I talked about earlier start to change as far as attrition and retention and things like that. But talking about wellness and emotional and mental wellness in the workplace, again, I feel like is fairly new, but becoming more common. And programs like mindfulness coaching and having opportunities to be social with our coworkers, even through times of this remote working that we've been doing, I think are really, really important to lift the needle off that record and to find a moment of quiet and focus. We've been very noisy and staring at these computer screens over the last year. And I think that when we see change resiliency, it's going to be, it's intrinsic. And each person has that thing that lifts the needle off the record for them. So I encourage people to look for that, even in the workplace.
Yeah. Psychologically safe workspaces is, to me, it was to me a relatively new term in the last, several months. And I'm just wondering, I'm trying to come to my own definition around that. But Eric and Erica both, I'll start with you, Eric. When you think about psychologically safe workspaces, how would you describe those spaces?
Well, probably the first, and I'm going to go at it from the perspective of how we interact with our clients, our community, is that the person who's receiving the messaging feels that it's a place where they have choice. And whether that choice is, I'm going to volunteer my opinion, or I have a choice to, this is not an area that I feel comfortable with. And they feel included. There's that inclusiveness thing. And I think once people feel that, then they begin, that engagement number, if you will, begins to rise. Because again, it's safe. And if we're in that place, it's a place where you can go and you can be productive. It's healthy.
Mm-hmm. When fostering that safety also leads to feeling that I could ask more questions, that curiosity can come out without fear of repercussion or retaliation. And gosh, that just leads to the best things in the workplace. If I feel safe, when we're going back to growth mindset, if I feel safe enough to fail and learn from that opportunity, then you have just created a really amazing growth mindset culture.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I'll share really quickly in a recent monthly workforce newsletter that the Chamber sends out. I talk about a friend of mine from high school who's a professor, teaches freshmen, incoming freshmen, an IT class, programming class at a really small college in Pennsylvania. And what she realized a few years ago was these really bright young people who weren't used to failing at anything were coming in and being really challenged and being kind of having a fixed mindset, going, I'll never get this, I'll never understand it, this is too hard. And what she started doing after doing some research on growth mindset was she started modeling the behavior. So every semester she would learn something new. And one time it was crocheting, and she would be doing this in front of her students to show, I didn't know how to crochet 3 weeks ago, but now I'm learning. She taught herself how to rollerblade, which those of us who love her dearly were terrified for, but she still did it. And it was a way to show the students, as your leader, as your professor, I'm learning something new too. And yes, it can be frustrating. In the business world, when we think about business leaders, what kind of concrete things can I do as a business leader to show my team that I'm learning something too, I might fail, and failing is okay, because I'm learning from it.
I have a very simple one, and that's rooted around the idea that some things are better caught than taught. And it's modeling. It's that observation. I would imagine that the students in the school you're talking about, they may not have come out and overtly said, oh, I see you're embracing the growth mindset, so therefore I will too.
Right.
I think it's an observation thing. Like we all do that. Can I trust this person? Is this person, do they care about me? If I get that sense, and then they're willing to navigate some difficult changes or taking on something new, I'm probably going to be much more inclined. And for business leaders, that to me that's the definition of leadership. It's that influence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that for me, it's around, as a leader, being open to feedback and asking for it. Asking for feedback, not only from my leader, but asking for feedback from the people who are on my team. And that is a new behavior for some leaders. And trying on new behaviors often feels uncomfortable. So those conversations might need to start as scripted, where they're, having a weekly tag with an employee might need to have an agenda and build in those questions. how do you think we did last week? How am I doing? What can I do to help you this week? Really asking for that feedback. And then when delivering feedback, making sure that it's actionable, that it's constructive, that it's based on, a key tenet of growth mindset is that positive feedback is based around effort and not natural ability. That fosters that sense of growth and learning is a key important thing on that team. So there are some tactical ways to build that in without having, I guess I'll say, a highly emotional, intelligent, in touch leader. That's a way that an organization can start to foster that a little bit with some strategies.
Yeah. It sounds like too, you're describing a bit, Erica, when we look at those traditional performance evaluations, putting higher value on something that someone's already attained, maybe in something that they're already good at, as opposed to maybe challenging them to grow and develop in an area that they need some opportunity to grow, but then kind of how are we encouraging them to, to kind of develop themselves even further with our support and our coaching as well. That can be a real challenge for some leaders to make that move from, highly calculated things I can really quantify and look at and enumerate versus this, you're trying, you're growing. How, Eric, how can we coach, our individual team members, maybe when they are struggling a little bit and, let them know that, maybe some of the frustrations that they're feeling, the emotions that they're feeling by not, being able to get there yet. How can a business leader, recognize maybe that individual's frustration and coach them through that?
I think that we've kind of touched on a little bit before about the idea of empathy and authentic empathy, understanding that when I go to that place, I'm going to be much more willing to have a vibrant conversation, a vibrant come alongside of you to help you as you're making your way through. And quite frankly, be vulnerable. You can say that, 6 months ago, I gave the presentation, the board didn't like it. They thought I was light on my whatever, but I went back. There's nothing wrong with a subordinate seeing that. Actually, it's a sign of strength and leadership. It really is. Because anytime that I've ever encountered someone who made it clear that they knew everything, that they had everything together, I knew immediately, this is not someone I can trust.
Right.
And I want to give grace to those people who are working through that, because some people see that in themselves and they're trying to get better. However, that impacts that person tremendously. So if we can be more empathetic and we can kind of look at it through that lens, I think we have a greater chance that this person's not going to view failure as some indictment of them as a person, and more of it as it's part of the process of getting to where we want to go.
Yeah, I agree.
I love that you said my two favorite words you said were authenticity and vulnerability. And you're right. You can sniff out a leader that is inauthentic faster than anything. And they don't even have to announce it to you. You can see it in their behaviors and actions, the way that their teams interact. I think that's really important to call out those words from a leadership perspective, that not only does that foster respect, but it does embed trust. When you trust your leader, some of those things you might not be able to call out why I trust someone, but it is around being authentic. And you described that perfectly.
Thank you.
I agree. I think vulnerability, when we talk about vulnerability and empathy, they do go together. And that curiosity piece, if I think I know everything, I think I'm in that fixed mindset space, I can't really grow. If the last year and all the disruption has done, anything for us. I think you mentioned this earlier, Erica. It's the kind of the leveling of the playing field in some ways. We all kind of got thrown into the deep end of the pool, and we're struggling through this together. What are some big, when next year, or that's maybe a little too hopeful, 3 years down the line, when we're looking back at this, time we've just all experienced together collectively, Erica, what do you hope we'll take forward from this in the business world? What will this time period done to change us, maybe for the better?
I think that we will see some old policies get tossed aside when it comes to flexibility in the workplace. I think we're going to see that that results-oriented work environment get embraced by some more organizations that wouldn't have traditionally, because we now have, whether we wanted to or not, we went through this period of learning that I can get my work done in my living room. I can, go to a coffee shop and be just as effective. And that's something that, so I think we'll see some of those more traditional workplace policies really change and into a more adaptable and flexible, where you sit isn't going to matter as much as how you're interacting with each other. And that's the other piece there is, as we talk about this fall and returning to campus, these are conversations that are happening right now around what is the density in a building going to look like from a people perspective. How, won't it be fantastic to be able to be back in the office and see everyone again? I'm so excited. But, will it be that we're back in the office, but we still have to do our meetings on Zoom? Well, that's going to feel strange. So there's all kinds of considerations around, where you're working, childcare. Some of those outside of the workplace considerations, I think when we look back, we're going to probably reflect on what we thought, and I'm speaking for Erica, what we thought was a good workplace practice really didn't need to be there in the first place.
So it sounds like what you're just describing almost is organizational growth mindset. As an organization, we're looking at, what can we do differently? How can we continue to evolve, our company, our school, our culture? Eric, what are your thoughts? Looking, a few years down the line, you're looking back at this period of time, what will we have learned or should take away?
I think the biggest one that comes to my mind is that hopefully we've turned the corner about brain health and mental well-being, that it's not a thing to relegate to a 1-800 fill in the blank, and that we will understand that it's a key component. And I would just say for all of us, whether here on the panel or out there in the audience, this has been a tough time. It really has. And we've all had to manage through it. And some of us, whatever tool we've used, I think that maybe now business leaders, employers are going to say, you know what, this is a part of what we do. This is part of our culture. And I think as that happens, and especially with that authenticity and more intentionality, it's not going to be the source for people's care per se, but it'll be that encouragement, that extra dose of or an extra wind in your sails that says, you know what, it's okay that I've hit an emotional wall. It's okay if I can't seem to shake these blues, whatever it may be, because my employer encourages me to get help, to work with other people and to find a place where I can get healthier. That's the giant one, because I think when that happens, all these other things begin to have a bit more, for lack of a better way of saying it, stickiness, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. Going back and responding to something else that Beth has shared with us, and just love to get your take on this. Workplaces are seeing a shift to favor soft skills, the emotional intelligence, like dependability, critical thinking, and adaptability. She also mentions empathy. And she says empathy, which is often used interchangeably with emotional intelligence, is taking its rightful place on the list as well. She also mentions that 85% of people, based on her data, are not happy at work. So what do we do as employers? I mean, how do we gauge, how happy our folks are? How important is being happy at work? To all of us as individual contributors or to leadership.
I think one of the things that leaps out to me as leaders go, I mean, obviously that 85% number is a lens into where we've got it wrong in the past. And I think leaders should just come out with that vulnerability, that authenticity, say, you know what, we've missed it here. In these 3 areas, we didn't do a good job, but we're going to change. And it's going to start with me, and we're going to begin to turn this. And I do believe, yes, you'll have naysayers that'll say, oh, that's just the flavor of the month, and this too shall pass. But if that leader can stick with that, and again, to Beth's, that change resiliency, right, and can apply the things that we've been talking about, they'll move to a place where that 85% will start to see another direction, as in down. And again, that's a place that's a benefit for everyone. That's a win-win across the board.
Great.
I think when an organization does an employee engagement survey to get those numbers to say, this percentage of our employees are happy, this percentage, blah, 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 what can we change, what can we improve? And then there is no action done on those survey results. That has such a negative effect on an organization's happiness level, because why? That just says, that the leadership wanted some numbers, but not really want to change or do anything about the numbers.
Right.
So that's one prong. The other prong, I think that's really important in the workplace to increase that happiness level is to embrace employees for themselves, not for the work that they do. And that goes back to that Venn diagram when we start talking about equity and inclusion. We start, embracing. I'm in a rock band, and my leaders love to talk about that. That doesn't have anything to do with my work that I do, but I feel seen and heard, and that my life outside of this laptop is just as important as it is inside of it. And that, I think, increases employee happiness tremendously and isn't a very hard lift. But again, we have to be intentional to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
Kelly, if I may really quickly, there could be some out there who might say, well, okay, I get it. Yeah, we need to start that. We need to do that. There's something that's important, I think, all of us as individual leaders, as well as those that lead organizations. When a crisis comes, you can only pull on the resources that you've built up until that moment to deal with it. So now is the time. If we're coming out on the other end of this thing, let's not go into this, well, everything's going to go back to the way it was and we're all good. No more of this, no more of that. But think about your resources. Think about your employees and build something in them so that when, it's not if, when the next crisis comes, that resiliency, that ability to navigate is so much stronger. That's, I think, a huge, huge key component here.
Yeah. Really putting something in that savings account, putting something away, really building, that base that we can go back to. Absolutely. Erica, I want to, and Eric, both, feel free, both of you to jump in on this, but, from an employee engagement survey, let's say I'm a small business owner, and I want to, find out the pulse of my organization, of my workforce. What are maybe one or two questions or one or two things that I should be looking to pull if I'm going to do, that type of a survey? I want to make it so people feel, they can respond. What would be maybe one or two questions that I should be asking?
Would you recommend working here to another person? That index right there speaks volumes about the culture of a business. And you can interpret and extrapolate some pretty good stuff. If you start with a scaled question, how likely are you to recommend working here? And then open it up for some free form why or why not. You'll get a lot of great answers from just that one very simple to ask question. Now, I think that employee engagement surveys, there's all kinds of companies out there that you could spend lots of money on buying engagement surveys. But I would warn a small business against what I would call stacking the questions in order to get the answers that you want. Asking things in a way that are very open, that people feel like they can answer. And then really, really chewing on those answers and putting together sort of a, we heard you. And let's talk about, as a small business together, some of the things that we can address that come from this survey.
That's really good.
Well, Kelly, and to Erica, we're one of those companies that offers we call them climate surveys, but ultimately one of the questions within ours is that idea of, am I being heard in times of crisis? And to measure that response is key. But I mentioned about building the resources earlier. That comes along with the story of a company that we didn't deal with directly. It was one of our colleagues who ultimately wanted a survey every year. Every year it was clockwork every year. And this particular organization was timely that way. This consultant who recommended, hey, we've identified some things. Let's carve out a pathway to, and that's our typical approach. They didn't want to do that. And unfortunately, it was in that area. It wasn't just that area, but it led to a real, not a pandemic crisis, but one internally. And I think that you mentioned this, Erica, about doing something with the results, taking action with it and being vocal about it, letting that be known that we are not just, again, stacking questions, trying that confirmation bias type thing. Mm-hmm. It's important because without that, you're ultimately, it's kind of a fait accompli, for lack of a better way of saying it.
Yeah, that great danger of asking people their opinions and thoughts and then really not having any response or reaction to it is, worse, I think, than not having asked at all, because that, really sends a poor message. I want to open up. I know we've had a few questions come in as we've been having this conversation, but do want to open up. We're at the point in our program to those who are listening in, if they have additional questions or comments they'd like to bring forward for our panel today. And I'll be watching for those as they come in. So I as we're waiting for other questions to come forward, this is just one that I'm always interested in finding out from people. How did you get here? Like, what brought you to the role that you have now? Because I think about, when we think about growth mindset and when we think about emotional intelligence and how that all fits into the world of work. Erica, what brought you to your role? What was your journey?
Oh, goodness. Well, I'll keep it short because it's quite an interesting one. But many, many, many years ago, I had an amazing mentor and coach. His name's Tracy Austin. And he really left me with two things. One is you choose your attitude every day. And when there's a risk in front of you, you should probably take it. And gosh, I did that for years and years and years, and somebody liked it along the way. And so, so here we are. I went through some EQ training many years ago, and it was the language of my heart. It absolutely spoke to me, and I have been touting emotional intelligence as a key factor of performance ever since. So when I work with leaders and businesses, we start by talking about EQ, and I've crossed over industries, and what I'm finding is whether I'm in manufacturing and distribution or academics or retail, that those basic foundations of growth mindset and EQ are the same. It's not a skill set that needs to change because of your industry. And interacting with humans is just a favorite thing of mine. So I'm lucky to be where I'm at today.
So for me, Kelly and Erica, it really was a case of I am living proof that life is not linear. So from that perspective, I had something break my heart, and that was seeing people stuck, seeing people not knowing, should I go left? How do I make this decision? What should I do? Business leaders in that regard. And it led me down this path of understanding. At first, I thought it was a business move, but I've found since it's a calling. And that's spot on for me for leaving a great legacy. So that's ultimately the pathway for me.
I've had I think I've had a similar one. It's being a lifelong learner, growth mindset is really important to me, and also understanding how when we show up at work, it's not like it was like I mentioned earlier when I first started off, that it was you kind of leave part of yourself at home or part of yourself outside. We're now seeing, I think, opportunities where people can bring their entire authentic selves to the workforce, and that's exciting, to the workplace. One question we have from Amber Powell, and this is I love this. Is there a specific reading material you would recommend for an individual leader that is new to these concepts? So brand new. How do I get started? Where can I go to read something or listen in?
Well, I'll let Eric talk about his favorite EQ books, although I'm sure we have some similar ones. But I would say, from a leadership perspective, and getting to the humans, one of my favorites is actually, we haven't even talked about this, but it really touches on all of the topics, and it's the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. One of my favorites. Nice, easy read. If any of you are familiar with the 5 love languages, it's actually based around that, but how to really authentically appreciate the people that you work with. And that just goes back to some of that, social interaction tenet of EQ. And that for me, that's a great one.
Writing that one down.
There's a book that the one book that comes to my mind, though it is not specifically directed at emotional intelligence, is a book called The Road Back to You by Ian Cron and Suzanne Stabile. I may be butchering their names, but it's called The Road Back to You. And it's basically takes you through a journey through an ancient personality typing system called the Enneagram. And what I love about it is that it is this consistent messaging throughout about the importance of self-discovery and self-knowledge, which I think is a key component and partner to emotional intelligence. The more that we know about who we are, the better we're going to be at embracing many of the things that we've talked about this morning. But it's a fabulous, fabulous, fabulous book.
Erica, I know you also mentioned earlier, I think a mindfulness piece. Was that an app or something that you were talking about earlier, like to kind of help us in our growth and in our, desire to learn? I think you mentioned mindfulness. I just wasn't sure if that was an app or a book.
I did mention mindfulness as an actual practice. Some of my mindfulness coach friends call it attentional fitness, where we really just redirect our attention, whether it is, through our listening, through visual observation, through physical sensation. Again, lifting the needle off that record, even for just a couple moments. Some people compare it to meditation. I find it to be a bit different. There are several mindfulness apps that you can download on your phone, as well as meditative apps. Calm is actually one of my favorites that I use pretty often, just for that moment of peace. One of the activities I do with groups is to, in the room that we're in when we were face-to-face, to take a few moments and look around the room and point out something that they've never seen in that room before. And it stops that cycle that we always have spinning, and it redirects our focus for just a moment. And it's almost like clearing out some cobwebs for just a minute when we do activities like that.
That's great. We have another question from Jason Melton. Is there one area you think it's important to crank way up first, like empathy, and then go after other areas like adaptability? Or should you make incremental improvements on one, then focus on another? Or is there any sequence that helps, like empathy first, then adaptability, then leadership? So like, how do I get started? Like, where do I hit go first?
So I think for us, I would follow our pattern, which is a know, choose, give model. And inside of each of those areas, there are competencies. So for example, the know, I call it a life pursuit, contains things like emotional literacy and recognizing patterns or self-awareness. So you're working on the inside first. It's a you job, right? And then as you move forward, you go into the choose. What am I going to do with what I know now about myself? And then the give is ultimately, that's purpose. Things like empathy and noble goals and purpose and meaning, that kind of thing. But that, I know it's kind of abstract there, Jason, just because you may not know where I'm referencing, but I think having sequential is a really good path, depending on, again, your personality and your style.
And I love this because I feel like, Eric, I'm doing something right, because so my three-prong approach is first, awareness of self. So second, awareness of others. So we learn about ourselves, and now we learn about how are others perceiving you. And this is sort of a leadership focus. And then redirection strategies would be my third. So when things don't go well, or when you do get negative feedback, what are some strategies that we can employ to help redirect our thoughts or the thoughts and behaviors of the people that we work with? So I feel like I'm doing it right because I did awareness of self first.
Awesome.
That redirect part can be really a challenge, though. Like, what does a person do when they're getting this kind of feedback and they have to process it, they have to take it in, and then what's that strategy look like? How do you go to the redirect place?
Oftentimes, if it gets bad, we need to go in an employee and labor relations route, but we want to prevent that from ever happening, right? So it's through conversation and engagement. If there are poor behaviors happening in the workplace, putting your ostriching, I call it, putting your head in the ground and just pretending and hoping it goes away, just says that behavior is okay to those employees. And they don't get the chance to say, gosh, I didn't realize what I was saying was impacting other people like that. And so we have to be open to talking to each other. Leaders have to be open to delivering feedback. And receiving feedback is just important as it is giving it. And that's hard. Like I said earlier, trying on those new behaviors feels weird and uncomfortable for a while, but that's where the real growth comes from.
Yeah, I agree.
I would also add too, and something I've discovered recently is that setting aside specific times of the day, because so much is flowing at us. And this technique is rooted around the idea about truth. So I'll ask myself, okay, is what I'm thinking true? Is it true? And then I'll ask the follow-up question. Do I know for certain that it's true? And this is interior work, right? It's when I totally butchered the call in my head, right? I'm thinking I'm the worst. No one understood what I was saying. And the inner critic begins to chant, oh yeah, you're right, Eric, you are the worst. And I've been telling you that for years. We need to be able to stop and go, okay, wait a minute. Is it true that I'm the worst? And do I know beyond a shadow that that's true? Because what happens is, Kelly, I just noticed, right? You kind of start laughing a little bit because you're kind of going, of course I'm not the worst. There is no worst. But you know what? If we're not careful, we'll go through days of hearing all these messages, all these things that just, it bombards us. And we begin to adopt that. So I like this idea of, just stop for a moment and examine what it is that's going through your head. I love a calendar appointment too. That's a wonderful way to remind me to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really, yeah, absolutely. Give it so much importance that it's right there on the calendar to say, we're going to spend some time, working through that. I'm thinking about what you just said too, about how we send ourselves so many, negative messages. I can go back to, a time when, I got picked last for basketball. What did that mean? And you continue to message yourself that way too. But I guess also tying in this whole piece of empathy around this too, understanding that everyone around us is probably doing that too, right? So to be aware that people are giving themselves, these negative messages based on, gosh, I really, totally messed that up. And, it was the worst and I'll never recover and I'll never get over that. Goes back to that fixed mindset, right? It's like fixed in that place, like I can't get any better, when we know we can, if we're intentional about it and we give ourselves that space and grace that you mentioned, Eric, to grow. I've really enjoyed this conversation today. I'm sorry that Beth wasn't able to be with us in person, but really appreciate her input and questions and commentary as well. Erica and Eric, thank you both so very much. Thank you to all of you that joined us for the conversation today. Please know that in the next week or so, we'll also be providing some thought leadership as a follow-up to this conversation. And for our chamber members on the call, part of our offering to you is to come into a huddle on June 24th, and we'll be able to ask even more in-depth nuts and bolts questions with members of our panel. I want to say thank you and stay safe and be well, and join us again for another chamber event. And we have a few closing remarks from our sponsor at Local IQ. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I am Ruth Ann Alvarado. I am a multimedia sales executive with Local IQ and the USA Today Network. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you this morning to wrap up this important conversation. Local IQ is a very proud partner of the Columbus Chamber and its Experience series, and we recognize the importance of facilitating conversations on workforce and talent in our Central Ohio community. I am very excited to be here today to have an opportunity to quickly paint you a picture of the large scope of marketing expertise and resources that we are able to bring to the table for our clients here at Local IQ. We provide sought after award-winning journalism to over 260 local media brands across 46 states. So the power and reach of our network is truly unmatched, locally, regionally, and nationally. Our educational and informative editorial content is a vital resource to 1 of every 2 adults in the United States, with over 140 million unique monthly visitors. We were able to truly see the large impact that our journalism plays in the daily lives and decisions of individuals all across the country with the hit of COVID in 2020. It was staggering to see how many millions of people were seeking trusted content to ensure that they were up to speed with daily changes with the pandemic. We've seen firsthand the value of providing trusted local journalism to the communities that we serve, not only to educate and inform our readers, but to bring a robust and highly qualified audience to our advertisers. As the daughter of small business owners, I understand that marketing is just frankly too expensive to waste on reaching an unqualified audience. Our large amount of solutions and unmatched reach enable us to develop customized strategies where we focus on specifically delivering your message to your defined target audience. This allows us to get directly in front of consumers who are more likely to convert and engage with your brand. So ultimately minimizing marketing waste. We are able to simplify the marketing process with having one key point of contact that can assist with the full arsenal of digital solutions, traditional print, event-based marketing activations, targeted assets, direct mail, customized promotions, and many more. I just had a conversation this week with the Columbus business owner who said to me, wow, I didn't know the Columbus Dispatch did all of that. Local businesses really are continuing to be amazed at the scale and reach that we can provide. We provide industry-leading proprietary technology that others do not have access to. We have innovative tools, Facebook partnerships that allow us to target smarter and more effectively. Our competitors just simply don't have the technology and access that we are privy to on the social platforms. We also have full transparency reporting consultation, intelligent business solutions, layered strategies, and we are the largest Google Premier partner in the country. If you need assistance in fine-tuning your marketing and improving your ROI, please reach out. All of the resources at Local IQ can begin working for you to start yielding stronger results for your business. Thank you all for joining us this morning. We hope you will consider joining us for a future Columbus Chamber program, including the upcoming Experience Series conversations. More information can be found at columbus.org/events. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.